promoting mindful well-being in everyday life. This is the Pragmatic Alchemy Podcast with your host, Courtney Edwards.
Hi, everybody. I'm Courtney Edwards, the host of the Pragmatic Alchemy Podcast, and I'd love to welcome you to episode 3 of our second season. Today, we're welcoming Margaret Rizzuto to the show. Margaret is a native New Yorker who relocated to Providence, Rhode Island during the pandemic at the height of the real estate market. She describes this as "what a ride," which I can only imagine. Margaret is also a professional photographer, working really with a lens, pun intended, towards empowering women. And she's a mindset coach where she uses tools of positive psychology, mindset shifts, gratitude, and the Enneagram to help create positive change. And the Enneagram is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk about our types, how we see ourselves through the characteristics and traits of the types. Margaret was a huge help to me in dispelling the myth of being only one type. As a good Aquarius, I can't really settle in on just one type. And we're also going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the intersections of Enneagram with some other ways that we explore ourselves, like Myers-Briggs typology and astrology. We're going to talk about Margaret's early experiences with Enneagram and how she came to use this in her own life as well as professionally. We're going to tell you a whole bunch of different books and resources if this is a topic that you're interested in looking at more deeply. And we're just really going to take a minute or two to talk about the 9 types of the Enneagram, give some overview of their descriptions. We're going to talk about wings, levels of development, as well as the instincts, the 3 primary instincts. And so you're going to leave this episode hopefully understanding much more about the Enneagram itself, different ways to educate yourself more deeply about it, and maybe looking at how you can incorporate this into your own practices, particularly as we talk about extensively self-acceptance, self-knowledge, and self-compassion. So thanks for being here with us. And now let's get on with the conversation. Hi, Margaret. Thanks for being here today. I'm so excited to finally have this conversation. Listeners may not know, but we have been working on this for months, it feels like. I think it was green and luscious out your window the very first time we had a conversation. And now today we're all on snow watch. So it's taken us a while to get here, but I'm really excited. I think a great place to start would maybe be for you to tell folks a little bit about yourself and the work that you do. And then we're going to dive into a really enlightening conversation about Enneagram.
Great. Well, thank you, Courtney. I appreciate being here. And yes, it is absolutely not green and lush today. So I do coaching. I coach predominantly midlife women. The Enneagram is absolutely one of the tools that I use in coaching. And I also do photography. And as we talk a little more and I divulge my type, you'll see how the two of those things totally come into play.
I love that. Should we start that? Well, maybe that could be the preview. What is your type, Margaret?
So I identify as a type 4. And I say it in that way, a little bit cagey, because I think, we get very stuck on our types with the Enneagram. And one of the things that I have learned and always been taught and really subscribed to is that we are really all 9 types. We have pieces of every type in us, and we have to because we're such multidimensional people, right? So for me, I identify as a type 4. I have tested as a type 4 for well over 20 years. So it feels like a good fit for me, and that's what I kind of follow in my own personal Enneagram work.
Excellent. Excellent. I love that. So one of the resources you had shared with me during our conversation a few months ago was the tri-type test, which I really loved because I was having a hard time nailing down my type. I feel like every time I've taken the test, I've gotten a slightly different response. And I've taken a few different tests. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit in this conversation. But the tri-type was really helpful for me because it did provide that openness to not just be one, because I was having a really hard time finding just one that fit. So my when I took the tri-type test, I got a 947 in that order, and that felt correct. So
Right.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, the tri-type, it does add a whole nother level
Mm-hmm.
to the Enneagram. But there are so many things that come into play with the Enneagram, right? So I'm a type 4. On one side, I have a 3 wing, which is like the achiever and person that kind of wants to be seen. On the other side, I have a type 5, which is more of like the investigator, someone who seeks security and wants to not be seen. So you really want to look at like the whole picture of the Enneagram and kind of take in all the pieces of it, because that's so important, because we are so much more than a single type.
Right. So maybe we should spend a little time there. Would you be willing to provide a quick overview of the types? And you mentioned the word wing. Maybe just a quick explanation of what that is for folks who are not familiar.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have our 9 types, and I will quickly go through those. But we have the 9 types, and let's just say hypothetically we're talking about type 2, right? Type 2 is the helper. It's the person that wants to give and to somewhat be recognized for their giving. But for right now, let's just say it's that helper person that we all know, right? So you've got type 2. On one side, you have 1, and on the other side, you have 3. That is called the wings. And for type 2, they take in some of the characteristics of each of their wings. Some people very heavily, some people a little, some people just kind of dance in and out of them. But it is absolutely an important part of the Enneagram, what your wings are.
Okay. So folks
So,
are exploring this for themselves. They should look at, if they take a test and they get a type, they should look not only at that type, but then what's on either side, what flanks it on either side.
absolutely, because you will, to varying degrees, you will absolutely bring in characteristics from that type into your being.
And for a
Yeah,
type 9, well, and this might also be true for 1, right? Then it's for 9, the wings are 1 and 8. And then for 1, the wings are 9 and 2. So it's like a
that's correct.
circle.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
It is the numbers directly to the side of your
Mhm.
type.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent.
So when you were thinking about and having trouble landing with type 9, did you look at the wings on either side? 1, the reformer, and 8, the challenger?
I had, yeah, and I can't remember now specifically where I had landed on that. Although, just even in reflecting, I don't imagine it's a 1. Excuse me, because 1s tend to, in my interpretation of them, have a little bit more law-abiding principles attached to them, and that doesn't feel like me.
Right. Law abiding and very black and white.
Correct. Yeah. And I live in the gray. It's funny because I think that's one of the things that makes the peacemaker resonate with me is that I do tend to live in the gray, which I think then is an openness to seeing a lot of different perspectives. And
Right.
I think my hang up on peacemaker was that I was comparing it or assuming it to be a synonym with doormat. Right. That if I was in a peacemaking role, that I was being acquiescent and letting people walk all over me. And just due to, growth and development in my own life, I really wanted to reject that.
Yeah, and to be fair, that is not that a 9 is a doormat, but in their desire to have peace and to make everybody happy, they sometimes have that tendency to put themselves and their own needs last.
Yes. And if my therapist is listening to this podcast, she's laughing at me right now because that's what we work on all the time.
Right. And that's actually one of the places that the Enneagram becomes so useful, because when you start learning about things like that, you can come to a place of, okay, I accept this, and now how do I develop further so
Mhm.
that this isn't a negative in my life, but something that I can use in a more positive way?
Right, right. So just to backtrack a little bit, we've named type 1 as the reformer, type 2 as the helper, type 9 as the peacemaker. What are the other ones for folks that might not know?
Yeah, so we have type 3, which is the achiever. They're very image conscious and performance conscious.
Mhm.
Then type 4, the individualist, who has a need to feel unique and special, and they're intense in their emotions.
Mhm.
Uh, Type 5 is the investigator. Um, Type 5 is, you might find researchers as type 5s. They're a withdrawn type. Type 6 is the loyalist. Type 6 also will often have uh, issues around anxiety. Um, but they're, as the loyalists, they're just beautiful, loving people. Type 7 is the enthusiast, and they are very much that. They're enthused about life and everything and want to do everything. And we all know that person who doesn't say no and just overextends themselves. Type 8 is the challenger. And I always feel like I don't love that word necessarily for type 8,
Mhm.
because that somewhat has a negative connotation, but type 8 is a strong, powerful presence. And
Mhm.
then type 9, as you said, is the peacemaker.
Mhm. Mhm. Beautiful. And to go back to what you said right before those descriptions, this idea of looking at this tool as a way to know ourselves better. How do you view that as connected to well-being? And maybe a second part to that question: when somebody is struggling with accepting all of the flavors of their type, um, how do you encourage people to make peace, to be their own type 9?
Right, right. That's an interesting question. In terms of how I would bring the Enneagram into the well being, I think that any tool that we ever use that helps us to see ourselves and our patterns on a deeper level is part of well being. And one of the things that's really prominent with the Enneagram is just this idea of being present what is going on in your life as a type, let's just say type 8, as a challenger type. I think the Enneagram is really hard for people that are a type 8, because they're strong and they want to, they are more comfortable believing in themselves than in anything else.
Mhm.
Not that the Enneagram is something you believe in, but it's a tool that you could use, right? So, learning more about your type, and like I'll just bring it to my own experience. I'm an introvert. I'm a kind of withdrawn type. um, like if there was a party, I would be all excited to go, and then the night of the party, I'd have a million reasons why I couldn't be there, because I wasn't comfortable being in a crowd of people that I didn't know. And for years and years, I always thought, God, what is wrong with me? Why? I always thought that is such strange behavior. And the more I learned about the Enneagram, and I realized that is just an inherent quality that I have. And just having that validation, just understanding it from that level, helped me to let go and helped me to realize, no, this is not a character flaw. This is just a preference for me. And
Mm.
how do I work with it? It
I
kind of took out
love
that, strong emotional connection to it.
Yeah, and I love that because As a coach and a counselor and a therapist, I've sat with so many people asking the question, what is wrong with me? Why am I like this? And I think being able to apply some neutrality to it, because this is just one part of who you are, and I like to work with people when they're struggling with that idea. Why am I like this? Why am I an introvert? To think about what are the ways that it serves you to also be that way, instead of being so hyper focused on the ways that it doesn't align with societal expectations or this idealized view we have of ourselves, whatever it is that's causing that friction, but then to look at it through the lens also of, well, how can I make this work for me? And I think that can be a really
Yeah.
powerful way to think
There's
about it.
there's a organization called the Enneagram Prison Project, and they bring the Enneagram into prisons and teach people, about their types and their proclivities and inclinations and stuff. And one of the things they say, which I've always absolutely loved, is it's not what's wrong with you, but what's right with you.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think that, especially when we talk about well-being, to just give ourselves a little grace,
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
it's not always what's wrong. It's not always what's wrong. It's better to think what's right.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And that's a cornerstone of the work that I try to do in the world, is to help people shift their light onto that focus a little bit more. I wanted to hop back. You mentioned being an introvert. And I guess, what is your view on how Enneagram compares to some of the other psychometrics, personality assessments, Myers-Briggs, strong interest inventory, Holland code, that kind of stuff? Do you see alignment, differences, intersections?
I do actually. I do. Most recently, and this is a little bit of an aside, but I have a client who's very into astrology, and we were having conversations, and I am so struck by the commonality and consistency between astrology and the Enneagram.
Yeah.
And, and yes, I do see it with other personality profiles.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There is consistency for sure.
Yeah. So my that four that showed up in my tri-type, and that I wanted, that was how I was like, I want to identify as a four because I'm an Aquarius. And if you look at some of the, ways that being Aquarius is interpreted, one of it is that kind of, beat of your own drummer, kind of doing your own thing. And that sort of, viewing yourself uniquely as a unique being. And that really hits true. But Aquariuses are also the humanitarians of the zodiac, which does then kind of align with some peacemaking tendencies.
Right. So there is that crossover,
Yeah,
right? It's interesting to see.
yeah,
Really
yeah, for
interesting to
sure.
see.
Yeah, I'm
Mhm.
an INFJ on the Myers-Briggs, so I'd be interested to dive deeply into seeing where INFJ shows up in Enneagram.
Oh, I'm INFP.
Oh, okay, okay. So that's why we're in sync. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting to just look at the, what you were saying before about your own introvertedness. I know we're deviating a bit from Enneagram, but I'm a very outgoing, enthusiastic introvert. And so it was very confusing to me for a long time of like, I love people, I love socializing. So why does it feel so bad sometimes to do that? And then in learning about it, I was able to say, oh, well, it just means I need to recharge after I do those outgoing, gregarious, people oriented things.
Right. I think we all have that same misconception about what an introvert means. We hear introvert and we think about that person that hides behind a rock, right? But it's not that. It's more how we process things, not how we are externally. Because, like you, I know many very, very extroverted introverts, if you will. But it's more about that processing, that time that you need afterwards to recharge. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So how did you get into this work? What first brought you to Enneagram? Was it your own curiosity or was it always specifically a tool towards coaching?
Oh no, I've been dancing with the Enneagram for well over 20 years. I'd be reading, doing whatever, and somehow the Enneagram would come up, and I'd be like, "Oh, that's so interesting." And I'd go and I'd take tests like everyone does, right? And then I'd read it. I'd read a little more and I'd find it really fascinating. And I'd go get the latest book and I'd read a little bit. And then life would happen and the book would go on the shelf and I'd kind of forget about it until it came up again. And sometimes it was years later. Well, most recently, I would say over the last 4 years, it popped up again. And I was really ready this time. I was like, wow, this is really a powerful tool. And I decided to really jump in. So beyond just getting books, which I did, several new books. Um, I
We'll talk
also
about those in a second.
I then also did training. I did two certification programs. I did a couple of trainings with the Enneagram Prism Project. Then I did a year-long training with Russ Hudson, who is one of the prominent people in the Enneagram.
Mhm,
And it just made sense to bring it into my coaching work.
mhm,
It just makes sense because we work with people, and any tool that you can give someone that helps them to look at themselves through a lens of understanding and compassion
mhm.
can only be helpful. Can only, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. That's that self-compassion piece, I think, is the way that I find this shows up the most when I work with Enneagram with clients is this idea of just getting to know yourself and getting to be friends with yourself, because in so many cases we're not. And I just think there's a lot of societal reasons for that. One of the things I was going to mention earlier is I was reading, I can't remember now if it was one of the books I have or if it was an article, but it was talking about how if you're working with someone who's been socialized female and they score highest as a type 2, which is the helper, that you should to some extent disregard that and look at the next type because of how much people who are socialized female are socialized to be helpers. And I just
yeah.
thought that was really interesting. And I don't know if you had ever heard anything like that or what your thoughts are on that. But I just thought when I hear how many people who've been socialized in that way, really internalizing the burden part of being a helper, to be able to kind of open up, use that as a tool to open up that conversation to say, well, here are other things that you also are.
Right, right. I haven't heard that, and I do find it fascinating, and I can see it. I can see
Hmm.
that correlate. Totally see that correlation. The helper is such a there as with any of the types. You can look at it and you could see. I'll jump back to 8 just because, and I jump back to 8 because that's an easy one to see, right?
Hmm.
The challenger. But then when you look at and go a little bit deeper into the challenger, looking at the gifts, I think that's such an important thing with the Enneagram, with coaching work, therapy. As you said, just helping people see that there is a gift to every burden, let's say, or every challenge. There is also a gifted side, and that's the important part to look at. And I think that's a really, really powerful piece of the Enneagram as well,
Hmm.
because each type has gifts that they bring.
Hmm.
Even the helper. I mean, they have the need to help, and there's the challenge of sometimes losing themselves. But what a gift to be there for another person.
Right. Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. It's like, how do we just achieve helping with boundaries? Like, you don't need to throw out your helping capacity or your helping inclinations. Just let's create some healthy boundaries around that so that you still get to, enliven that part of yourself, but do so in a way that doesn't then harm yourself.
Yeah, and as someone gets a little deeper into work with the Enneagram, there's something called the levels of development.
Hmm.
And so let's say a type 4, the individualist, right? A type 4 at a lower level of development, middle level of development and higher level of development will look completely different.
Hmm.
So like, so it's interesting when you delve into it a little bit more and you start taking things into consideration, like the wings, like the tri-types, like the levels of development. It's a very, very rich tool.
Mm-hmm.
However, having said that, for someone who's just starting out, learning about your type is really important and really useful, but it's as important to learn a little bit more about all of them because we do absolutely bring in elements of all of the different types.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an excellent point. And um, one of the things I wanted to mention, and you hit on that with the levels of development, is I don't know if I'm pronouncing the first name correctly. Is it Riso? Riso Hudson? Riso Hudson?
Right, so
Riso.
young.
Okay. I've only ever seen it in print. I've never heard it spoken before. But their book, the big thick blue book, that has, you're going to show it to me right now. There it is.
It's on my
That's
desk.
the wisdom. Thank you. The wisdom of the Enneagram. And I'll link to it in the show notes. That has such a great visual representation of the different levels of development and how the types are going to show up as you sort of work on your own self-development and your own evolution. And I thought that was a really great, and it's very simple. It's in a chart format. So it's kind of really easy to take that in and digest it.
Yeah. The other part of the Enneagram that I've always found really fascinating is the instinctual drive. So,
Mm-hmm.
there are there's the head, the body, and the heart.
Mm-hmm.
So, like type 8, 9, and 1 live more in the body.
Mm-hmm.
Um, 2, 3, and 4, heart. 5, 6, and 7, head. And how that really comes into play when you're learning about this is one of the ways, it's where we focus, it's where we bring our attention, right? It's how we act in the world or
Mm-hmm.
react in the world based on where we are in the triads. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, like for say the feeling triad, which is 2, 3, and 4. Um, there's often, not always, none of this is cast in stone. These are somewhat generalizations based on years and years and years of study, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the triads often have issues around self-image, or they tend to be a little bit more seeking of attention, or their ego defense moves a little bit stronger towards shame.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, these are just things to learn because then when they come up in your life, as opposed to saying, oh no, why do I feel this way? Why am I dealing with this shame? I'm such a bad person. Oh, wait, that's just somewhere that I land and I can let it go too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's so powerful, being able to see it, name it, and then release it, I think is
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah.
So we just mentioned the wisdom of the Enneagram. I also have the Enneagram Made Simple, and the new Susan. I'm blanking on her name right now, but the Buddhist Enneagram book. And I'm
Yeah.
totally blanking on her name right now, which is bad podcasting, but we're gonna let it go. Wonderful resources. Do
Really?
you do you have specific resources that you recommend?
Well, and I just turned around to look at my um, Enneagram shelf here.
Oh, a whole
Um,
shelf. I'm so envious. It's Susan Piver, by the way, the Buddhist
oh,
Enneagram. It just came. I knew as soon as I let it go, it would come to me.
great. Well, I think that if I dare say this, the Bible of the Enneagram is absolutely the wisdom of the Enneagram.
Well, that's why I couldn't come up with the title because I call it my Enneagram Bible. So,
Right.
yes. So I was like, I forgot the real name because I call it the Enneagram Bible.
Right, right. The one that I've been reading recently that I'm really, really loving is called The Enneagram Guide to Waking Up.
Okay.
And that's by Beatrice Chestnut. I love it because it gives really practical, useful information on how to deal with the areas that you would like to improve.
Mm, hmm.
Not the areas that are wrong with you, but the areas that you want to be even better.
Right, right.
So I think those are great books, and there are so many others. There's just so many books. I think one of the best resources is this resource time. Can I?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Tell us about resources.
I think one of the best resources is by far the Enneagram Institute.com.
The Enneagram Institute that's right down the road from me.
Oh, are
The one in
you in?
Stone Ridge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you're
Mm-hmm.
right. Oh, lucky are
I'm right
you?
there. I drive by all the time, and I'm like, one day I'm going to
Oh,
go there. I've never
oh,
actually been there, but I drive past it all the time. Yeah.
oh, yeah. That would be the one. Yep.
Yep.
Yep. And they have a really, really robust site, and they have
Yes.
a great test. Great
Yes.
test. But I think that I would be remiss in mentioning tests if we didn't say
This was
you're
my next
shaking your head
question.
and nodding, so,
Yeah,
so
I was
you
going to
know
say
where.
you might note that we're talking more about books than tests, and there's a reason why.
Yeah, because like anything, nothing is 100% accurate. So, what I like to say to my clients, use the test as a starting point.
Hmm.
Read about the type that comes up as your prominent type in the test. Learn about it. If it feels good, dance with it. If
Hmm.
it doesn't, then read some more and find the one. Nobody is going to know what type you are better than you know.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And I think so much of my interest in Enneagram and part of what sparked wanting to have you on the show and a workshop I had run a couple months ago, all of it stemmed from my own inability to take a test and get an answer that felt correct. I take the Myers-Briggs, yeah, INFJ every single time, right? I take the Enneagram and I've gotten 9, I've gotten 4, I've gotten 7. I think one time I got a rogue 1. I don't know. I must have been in a very compliant mood that day. Um, so I really struggled to be like, well, these all kind of sound correct. And that's why I was so grateful when you had directed me to the tri-type, because that really did yield a result that felt accurate. In that I was like, yes, these are, and those were the 3, the 9, 4, 7. Those were the 3 that most frequently did come up when I would take other tests, but it was never quite as consistent as some other personality measures that I've taken. Mhm.
Yeah, the tri-type is really interesting. Not everyone in the Enneagram world subscribes necessarily to the terminology of
Mhm.
tri-type, but everyone would say that we are all more than one type.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, I happen to think the tri-type is really powerful, and probably in the resources, that would be a good one to put on also, because they have a very good test, and because you took it.
Yeah, that's very thorough. It was very thorough, and it was a
Yeah,
completely different format than some of the other tests that I've taken.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
very visual, right?
Yes, yes. Yep,
Yeah,
card sorts and just sort of
right.
letting, well, and the other thing too, like, it wasn't, because it was visual, it wasn't, you had to go with instinct more than reading and interpreting a sentence and applying a yes or no response to it. Right? So many of the questions in the different inventories are, I like to be alone. I like to, you know what I mean? And you're like, well, sometimes, like, it depends. Like, and where the tri-type test, because it was visuals, it was like, well, just click the one that you like. And I wonder if that then let something arise outside of social conditioning, ego identity, like in the ways that we have these kind of maybe cognitive constructs of who we are or who we're supposed to be. When you're just sort of allowing yourself to be drawn to a visual, maybe that's a little bit more pure.
Well, I would agree with that because I also think too it gets you out of your head.
Yeah, yeah.
It gets you out of your head. And so like you say, you're answering from a more pure, certainly a more instinctual place.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And
I do think
I
that's
sorry. I was just going
power
to say I
set.
spend way too much time in my head. So anything that can get me out of there that's good.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any other resources that you wanted to mention before we start to finish?
So we have the Enneagram Institute. We have the Catherine Faber. I hope I'm saying her name right. Faber. Her site, which is the Tri-Type, that's a really great one too. She's got a ton of information on there.
Mm-hmm.
Another person that I would absolutely look up because she does wonderful work is who I mentioned, Beatrice Chestnut.
Mm-hmm.
She has a great site. She's got a lot of information available. And honestly, I'm hesitating to say too many more because I think what's important is it's not so much the quantity, but more the quality.
Mm-hmm.
And I think these are three really good places for someone who is interested enough to look a little bit further.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are three starting points that would give you so much information. And then if you want more, it's endless.
Right.
But I think
Yeah.
those would be a really great starting point for people.
Excellent. And I will link to all of those in the show notes so people can find them. I had mentioned a minute ago, I ran a workshop, I think it was back in September, for folks that wanted to explore. And I sent them the test through the Enneagram Institute. They brought the results, and then we had a few different books and questionnaires that we worked from. I did find using summaries and descriptions in the books and these questionnaires to be a little bit more beneficial than just going through and taking the standardized tests online. And two of the questions from the one book I was using really have stayed with me for months, and I keep asking them to everybody. So I'll share them. You can answer if you want to, but if not, definitely for our listeners. The first question was, what gets you out of bed in the morning? And the second one was, at the end of the day, when you're laying your head on your pillow, what will have made it a good day? And I really thought, there was a part of me that said, if we can answer those questions for ourselves, everything else will fall into place. And so for me, the thing I realized, I had to dig through all of my roles in society, but I realized the thing that actually gets me out of bed in the morning is curiosity. And at the end of the day, what makes it a good day is gratitude. And so I felt like those were important and really kind of affirming things to know about myself.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
we end our day in the same way.
Yes.
Gratitude is huge, and then
It is.
just to circle back around real quickly, when you talk about well-being, I think one of the most important gifts we give ourselves is the gift of gratitude.
I agree.
100, yeah.
Yeah. One of the first podcast episodes I did was on gratitude, and I really talk about it very frankly as a life-saving practice, and probably the thing that has most deeply impacted. It might be the reason that I'm a 7.
Mm.
That I was a cheerleader all through high school, so there might be some of that too. But when I think about the identity of a 7 and the enthusiast, I see that link with gratitude, because having a consistent and thoughtful and intentional gratitude practice has made me enthusiastic about all things. Because when you're looking for the good, you can't help but find it. And then that's very exciting, and you want to share it with other people.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Mm.
did we miss anything? Is there anything else you had wanted to share with the folks before we wrap up?
The Enneagram is so rich. This conversation probably can go on for days.
Yes.
But
Well, and you
I
can
think
always come back and talk more. Right now, open invitation. You tell me, we'll do this again.
Thank you. I think we gave people certainly enough to pique some curiosity and to be able to satisfy some of the curiosity.
I agree. Margaret, thank you so much for your time today, and for the wisdom and expertise that you've shared with the listeners. I think people are going to be really enthusiastic about learning more about this, and then by way of that, learning more about themselves. And my my parting words for listeners would be, whatever you learn as part of the Enneagram, couching it in that spirit of self-compassion, I think is a wonderful avenue towards well-being, because the more that we can be a friend to ourselves, to all parts of ourselves, the better off we're going to be. And so thank you so much for being here with us today.
Many thanks to Margaret for being with us today. I hope you found that conversation as enlightening and informative and as amazing as I did. I hope that this tool helps you get to know yourself a bit better and really just embrace who you are, as you are, how you are, and learn to work with the strengths that come with all of your different flavors and facets. If you want to give us a suggestion for a topic, send some feedback, ask a question, recommend a guest, you can reach us at Courtney@shineandsoar.com or fill out the contact form on shineandsoar.com/podcast. Share this content with your friends. It really does help us build the show if folks know about it. You can also rate, review, and subscribe on your podcast app of choice. We would be so deeply appreciative if you did. We'll see you next week with a brand new episode. In the meantime, take care of yourselves and each other.